Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. Dear friends, this weekend we were just speaking about the 5 aggregates associated with clinging, which is given in the Satipatthana Sutta as one of the Dhammas to be reflected on, one of the Dhammas to be observed with mindfulness. We were talking earlier in our live session about how when a person is getting into emotional reactions, how a feeling of the ego comes up, and that all 5 of the aggregates sort of bond together to feed into this almost overwhelming sense of a self that needs to be protected. I wanted to find a sutta that gives this same teaching in the context of the self view or the personality view. In Pali, it's called Sakkaya Ditthi. And that's defined in terms of having views about the self in context with each one of the 5 aggregates or all of them together. And so this Parilayaka Sutta is the one that I chose to give that lesson. This is in the Connected Discourses, number 22.81. Parilayaka is, or Palilayaka, 2 alternate spellings. It's a place. It's a village which is near the town of Kosambi in India. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Kosambi in Kosita's monastery. Then the Buddha, robed up in the morning, taking his bowl and robe, entered Kosambi for alms. After the meal, on his return from alms round, he set in his lodgings in order himself. Taking his bowl and robe, without informing his attendants or taking leave of the mendicant Sangha, he set out to go wandering alone with no companion. Well, this is connected to the same very famous story of the quarrelsome monks of Kosambi. They were involved in a dispute because of different opinions about a Vinaya question, and refused to settle their dispute, and rejected the Buddha's advice to them that they should settle their dispute. And it's for this reason that the Buddha left that place. He had been invited to stay the whole Vasa at that monastery, which is a tremendous thing to have the Sammasambuddha with you at your monastery. One thing that's noticeable in the sentence I just read is indicating the Buddha's own honorable attention to the details of the Vinaya. The fact that he set his lodgings in order by himself. This is one of the regulations given in the Vinaya when you leave a place. you should make sure that everything is in place and that it's been cleaned and swept and so forth. And to have the Buddha doing that himself instead of just walking away and letting his attendants to take care of it is a wonderful example. And because this teaching is about the danger of clinging to views, I think it's, in a certain way, it's setting it in a certain context, that he leaves a place where the monks have been overwhelmed by their opinions and views, overwhelmed by clinging to views. And so he's getting away from that. And we see, this is given in the sutta. No, it's not explained in the sutta, but it's in the surrounding stories. When he went to the, one of the stories that's given is that he went by himself to meditate in the forest, and he was attended on by a monkey and an elephant. And the elephant was named Palaika, and that's a sort of a Palea. It's kind of a pun with the name of the town. It's said in the associated Jataka story that the monkey gave him some fruit, and then was unfortunately fell and was killed, but was immediately transported to Tusita heaven. And it said that the elephant stayed with him through the entire vasa, serving him, and that in particular he prepared his water to drink. He prepared the water for bathing the feet, and he provided the warm water for washing up. And this really made me laugh out loud when I read that Jataka story, because we know the way that the elephants have their great trunk, and they're able to take up the water and give themselves a bath, or give their friend a bath by spraying the water on them. And so I was sort of visualizing the elephant using his trunk to give water to the Buddha. And in a certain way, there's another story. We talked about this either last week or the week before in the Upakilesa Sutta, that after the Buddha left Kosambi, he visited Anuruddha and the harmonious monks, and gave a special Dhamma teaching to those harmonious monks about meditation. So in this other story, the Jataka story, we could say symbolically that animals like elephants and monkeys would be harmonious, in that even though they possess 5 khandhas, they don't form views or get into quarrels about different theories or rules and regulations and so forth. Not long after the Buddha had left, one of the mendicants went to Venerable Ananda and told him what had happened. Ananda said, "Reverend, when the Buddha leaves like this, it means he wants to stay alone. At this time, no one should follow him." The Buddha, traveling stage by stage, arrived at Parilayaka. There he stayed at the root of a sacred sal tree. Then several mendicants went to Venerable Ananda, exchanged greetings. When the greetings and conversation were over, they sat down. They said, "Reverend, it's been a long time since we heard a Dhamma talk from the Buddha. We wish to hear a Dhamma talk from the Buddha." Then Venerable Ananda, together with those mendicants, went to Parilayaka to see the Buddha. They bowed and sat to one side. And the Buddha educated, encouraged, fired up, and inspired them with a Dhamma talk. Now, at this time, one of the monks had thought, "How do you know and see in order to end the defilements without delay?" The Buddha, knowing that monk's train of thought, said, "Monks, I've taught you the Dhamma analytically. Dhamma Vichaya is the first one of the requisites of enlightenment, the analysis of Dhammas." And now he gives an outline of the Dhamma that he's taught them. "I've analytically taught you the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation. We know what they are. The 4 right efforts. We know what they are. To prevent or abandon unwholesome thoughts, to cultivate or to arouse or cultivate wholesome thoughts. The 4 bases of psychic power. A nicer translation I like. The 4 bases of psychic power and the are given as Chanda, Virya, Chitta, and Vimamsa. This is a very good teaching. We should get into it sometime and get well established in how to be aware and balance these 4 different ways of moving forward on the path. So Chanda is the desire to develop on the path. That's your, like the willpower. Virya, that's the effort or the strength. Chitta means mind, and that's referring to mindful contemplation and meditation. So both sati and samadhi are covered in the term of chitta. And then investigation, which is vimamsa. So the both the observation of the Dhammas, developing the ability to accurately perceive the phenomenon that are observable to us, and also developing the perception of the different concepts taught by the Buddha, so they can be developed. And then the 5 faculties and the 5 powers, that's the same list at 2 different levels: faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And then the 7 awakening factors, that's going to come up very soon because that's part of the Satipatthana. That starts with mindfulness, and then investigation of states, and effort, piety, or joyful interest, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, and then the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is the list that the Buddha taught repeatedly, especially towards the end of his life, when he was he did a final tour that's described in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. And he went from town to town, and he was repeating, exhorting and explaining to them about this set of factors. So the Buddha wanted us to recall and remember this set of teachings. Even though I taught the Dhamma analytically, still a certain mendicant here has this thought: how do you know and see in order to end the defilements without delay? So then he answers the question: take an unlearned, ordinary person who has not seen the noble ones and is neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They've not seen true persons and are neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the true persons. They regard form as self, but that regarding is just a conditioned phenomena. What's the source, origin, birthplace, and inception of that conditioned phenomena? When an unlearned ordinary person is struck by feelings born of contact with ignorance, craving arises. This is getting to a section of dependent origination. So, being that unlearned person, that's your ignorance, which is at the very beginning of dependent origination. And then, in this case, he's explaining causation in a slightly different sequence, but it's very useful to us to see how from day-to-day life, how these views come to be. With that lack of wisdom, one is struck by feelings born of contact together with ignorance. Then craving arises from feeling, and then that conditioned phenomenon is born from that, namely this regarding of the form as the self. So the view arises right there out of craving. But that conditioned phenomenon, that is the view itself, is impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. And that craving, that feeling, that contact, and that ignorance are also impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. That's how you should know and see in order to end the defilements without delay. This is such a really significant, concise, and direct, very easy to understand way to get the natural wisdom of not clinging to anything, not reifying anything as a self or an essence, including your own opinions and views or the concepts that have arisen in your mind, the thoughts that have arisen, as well as all of the underlying factors behind that have caused that to arise. That it's all can be simply seen as ever-flowing stream of ever-changing, constantly changing phenomena that arise and disappear. It occurred to me that there's a way in which even for somebody who's has the stages of enlightenment, one is a stream winner, or even for an arahant, there still is the conventional health self is happening all the time. This is the self that we use when we make a statement like, would you please give me a cup of tea? So that's like two individuals there, but it's only conventional. It's not necessarily creating any necessity for the false view of the self to arise. But the conventional self is always coming and going. It's like it's a sort of a reality that flickers into existence, that arises and disappears. Elsewhere, there's when they talk about the suttas, there's a the sutta about the lump of foam, and if the Ganges River is carrying along a big lump of foam, a person sees it and examines it with wise attention. They see that it's vacuous, hollow, insubstantial, because it's just a lump of foam. It's just something floating along the river that's got no substance to it whatsoever. And so just the same way. And then that's the other metaphor that's sort of getting to this sense I have, the perception, how we can cultivate this perception and experience our day-to-day arising with all of this selfing in terms of how the conventional self arises in order to do the stuff we've got to do to fulfill our duties and responsibilities. If it's autumn and the rain is falling heavily, and as it splashes, it makes a bubble in the water that forms, and then it pops and disappears right away. So that's how the conventional self is. You may think that you've got a certain status in society, you have a certain title related to your job, you have another title related to your academic degree, you have another title related to your role in the position in the family, and you may think that those things are permanent for life, but actually they're very insubstantial, very subject to continuously changing. So one way of seeing it is just to see them as impermanent, but then the other way to see it, this is the way of seeing that the Buddha is counseling here, is to say when that the self is a conditioned phenomenon, and everything underneath the self is also a conventional phenomenon. And that in particular, the feeling or whatever the cause is that makes some feeling of a self coming up and some reason to for a craving to start to arise. They're struck by a feeling, and being struck by a feeling is some kind of, it's either a threat or an opportunity for the self. And when there's a threat, the feeling comes up. So if your body is in danger, your self comes up. If your feelings are in danger, let's say if other people don't respect your feeling, then your self pumps up. We gave the example, this was yesterday, if I say, oh, I feel depressed, and your friend says, no, you're not depressed. And he says, excuse me, that's my feeling. So the self popped up because of the challenge, but that conventional self is sort of still safe, but it's got the danger to be grasped and to become the self-view. So it's the grasping that makes it into the self-view. The danger is in the grasping. As long as it might be that when the conventional idea of the self is constantly on our mind, like if I'm continuously thinking, I'm a bhikkhuni and I have a master's degree and I have 2 students, then as long as I have those thoughts, even though like at the conventional level, those are true, but as long as I'm like constantly thinking about it, I'm having this danger of creating an opportunity for the grasping for the self view to arise. But when we are further developed along our path of training, it could be that those thoughts don't even come up. And even if there's a challenge, like if somebody doesn't respect my feelings, then the thought about, no, those are my feelings, that thought doesn't come up. It says, well, maybe you're right. So like that. Okay, so let's continue with this sutta. So the first one, the first wrong view that's given here is they regard the form as self. I'm going to review the 4 wrong views about form again at the end. So perhaps they don't regard the form as self, but they still regard self as possessing form. But that regarding is just a conditioned phenomenon. And then he goes through the whole lesson again. Perhaps they don't regard the form as self, and they don't think of self as possessing form, but they still regard the form in the self. But that's still a conditioned phenomenon, impermanent conditioned. And it's still something that is conditioned because there was a contact and there was ignorance, there was contact, there was a feeling, and there was craving. And so it's out of craving. All of these wrong views, according to this lesson, are arising from craving. And then the last one, they don't regard the form as self, or the self as possessing the form, or the form as in the self, but they still regard self in form. And that's just a conditioned phenomenon. I've got a note here. So the first wrong view, taking the form as self, is explained in the commentary as being the materialistic view or the annihilationist view. So you think that the body is the self, or that all 5 khandhas together are the self, that the self is a real thing, and that the self will disappear at the end of this life. So the self, it regards the self, and it regards the self as being impermanent. If somebody has that view, I'm trying to get this out of the intellectual realm into psychological things that we all might experience. Do you know what existential anxiety is? So you feel anxious because of the impermanence, because your existence is in danger, because the self, in whatever way you view it, is going to be annihilated. In Western philosophy, this came out very strongly during World War II and the Cold War after World War II, and the arising of the threat of nuclear annihilation, that humanity would be completely destroyed. And so with that, people who didn't have a religious idea of a self being with God in heaven, but they were simply happy to be in a sort of a materialistic self. They were like confronted with very strongly with this idea, it's really impermanent, it could be annihilated. And they experience anxiety because of that. So it's important for our times, because most Westerners, say like Europeans and Americans, even if they claim to be religious, actually, if you scratch the surface, actually they're materialistic. And a lot of people think that heaven is just a fairy tale. But they still believe that there's a self, and they still have all of the clinging, the anxiety, the stress, and the fighting and the quarrels that come about from trying to protect and defend their self, but it's within a context which is nihilistic situation. The second view, the idea of the self possessing form. In that way, the self is the soul, and the soul is the real thing, and the soul just temporarily has this body, and the soul just temporarily has all of the other accoutrements of this worldly life. But the soul is eternal and connected to God. The next one, the view that the form is in the self. That's the idea that it's not that you have your little individual soul, which is eternal inside of you, but that there is a universal soul, which is the Brahmanical Atman. So there's one all-encompassing global cosmic soul, and we're all part of that. And then the last one, the idea that the form, the self is in the form, is associated with animism. So if you think that each person and also things have a soul, so like the mountain, like there's the mountain is like a person, and the fire is like a person, and all of the things in the world become sacred because they all have souls. So you identify like many, many, many different gods, which is like the essential soul spirit of all these divine essential forms of the basic aspects of nature. So that's one way of understanding it, and it's really useful to think of how these ideas arise from feeling and craving, because these beliefs feel really good. God says, wouldn't it be lovely if I had a little soul inside of me and it was like this perfect crystal, like a diamond, that was never able to be harmed, and it's always pure, and it's not able to be touched by unwholesome evil deeds, and that it's loved by God, and it's going to go back and be with God later, or else that the idea of the cosmic self, it's really great to think I'm just participating, a little nodule in this universal thing, which is beautiful and divine and endless, or else this idea of this sacredness of the essence of things, like there's an essence of a person, an essence of a camera, an essence of a chair. I'm looking at the things around me, and that each these materialistic things are actually alive because they have their essence, and so when we get contact, and the contact and the feeling, those are part of dukkha, the ordinary feelings, because of their impermanence and unreliability. It's like everything that we experience is so unreliable. You can't count on it. The feelings won't stay the same. Even if you get a pleasant feeling, it doesn't last. You can't trust any of it. And even if you acquire a PhD and a job and some relatives or people around you, they won't last. You can't count on anything. It's so unpleasant. And so then the way to escape from this unpleasantness is to imagine that eternal soul, that eternal self. And so we can see how clinging to a self is arising. So it's something that is a real psychological thing, and it's so useful in the sutta how it makes the connection to this a sequence of contact, feeling, and craving as being where the wrong views come from. And the next, they don't regard the form as self, or self as possessing its form, or form in self, or self in form, but they regard feeling as self. And then it goes to the whole pattern with respect to feeling. They go through the whole pattern with respect to perceptions. They go through the whole pattern with respect to choices, sankhara, which very meaningfully is primarily like the volitional formations and decisions that we make. As Bhante Sujata translates choices, it also can include the fabrications that we make in the mind. So it's like with our mind, we create a world, and then we have to go and live in the world that we created. And so that's part of, and so if you think that that's a self, and then finally the consciousness is self, and that consciousness has different meanings in different circumstances. The most common context or way that we can experience consciousness is the knowing faculty that arises at each occasion when something is being experienced. So every phenomenon that you experience, every time you see, taste, hear, touch, smell something, that there's been the sense faculty, the corresponding kind of object, the conscious, the capacity to know that type of object, the contact, the coming together of that. And so consciousness appears in a relationship to the sense contacts. And that teaching is very important because you know how fast the sense contacts come and go. And so you can see that consciousness is not a permanent thing, but something that's always arising and coming apart with every single contact that's happening. There's another aspect or context in which consciousness comes up, and that's with a dualistic kind of consciousness, which when some phenomenon comes into our knowledge and we know it, there is an experience that there's a subject and an object. That consciousness has that capacity to create subjects and objects. Independent origination, it said that depending on ignorance arises formations. That's everything, in that case, everything that was happened because of causes and conditions that went beforehand. And then out of that arises the consciousness. And that is that consciousness with that capacity for a dualistic knowing of an object and having a subject that knows the object. And then that subject is where the self can start to come in. And then that dualism, independent origination consciousness, leads to nama rupa, sometimes translated as mentality and materiality. But the nama rupa is explained, independent arising, as the arising of an individual person or an individual sentient being who is coming to be born. And so when you have an individual who's been born, it's like that individual is like separated from everything outside. So when you have an individual, you have the inside and the outside. And so consciousness has this potential to create that dualistic way of thinking. And also consciousness has a tendency to experience a continuity. So even though, like the sankharas are creating those formations, those mental formations, as like your idea, your understanding of the world that you're in and yourself within that world. And what is it that makes the movie seem like a continuous story? So it's said to be a feature or a quality of consciousness that it can support that continuity. And it's for this reason that consciousness is actually, it's part of dukkha. Consciousness is not part of nibbana. Consciousness is part of dukkha. So that knowing faculty, which is dualistic, and A vijnana is like a separate knowing that knows things as being separated, that knows the separation of the self and the thing which is known. And so then you can see that knowing in itself, the very knowing, is subject to the creation of self-views, or thinking that, like what you say, I think, therefore I am. That because of consciousness, it's like maybe everybody knows your body is not yourself. You know that your body's going to get old and die, and you don't think it's yourself, so you're not disturbed about that. But a lot of people think that their consciousness is themselves. And that's why the consciousness is the last on this list of the 5 aggregates. So if you see the consciousness itself and all of the views arising in connection with consciousness are impermanent, conditioned, independently originated, that's how you should know and see in order to end the defilements without delay. So knowing and seeing in terms of the 5 aggregates, knowing and seeing in terms of that particular section of causation, of craving, feeling, contact, and view. Seeing all of it and every part of it as being conditioned phenomena, impermanent, dependently originated. Then we come to yet another wrong view. Perhaps they don't regard form, feeling, perception, choices, or consciousness itself. But still, they have a view like this. The self and the cosmos are one and the same. After death, I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, and imperishable. But that eternalist view is just a conditioned phenomena. And the source of that is ignorance touched by contact with a feeling. Now, maybe they don't have any of those things, but still they have this other view. I might not be, it might not be mine, I will not be, and it will not be mine. That's very difficult to understand. This is the materialistic view that what thinks that the self will cease to be in the future. And then somebody doesn't have any of those views, but still they have doubts and uncertainties. They're undecided about the true teachings. That doubt and uncertainty, the indecision about the true teachings, is just a conditioned phenomenon. And where does that come from? Exactly the same place as the others. An ignorant person struck by feelings born of contact with ignorance, craving arises. So doubt is coming from that. And so how to work with this? We might say it will not, everything, when we see the selfing happening, or the self arising, or the thoughts and opinions, the stories about the self that we start to concoct. Even if you're not like a theologian who's sitting at your cubicle making up a philosophy about the cosmos and something like that, in ordinary life, you'll have those experiences constantly, all the time, the self-arising. So the shorthand is, this is not me, I'm not this is not myself. So it doesn't belong to me, it's not my property. I don't identify with it. And I don't have an idea about a soul in connection to that. So this is the sutta. Now I'll see, we got lots of questions. Welcome, Uttara Sutta, Yankee Apple Martin, Asai Gregory. The text is scrolling, but my face is not moving. Okay. I'm curious to know whether anatta and anatomy share the same meaning. I don't know about, the common meaning of anatomy is not the same as the meaning of atta. It comes from Greek. Ana means up or apart, and temnin means to cut. So anatomy means cutting something apart. I don't think so. In this case, atta. So instead of the root ana and tema, the root is atta. And then when you make it not atta, it's atta. But Pali puts a sandhi in, they put the N in to make it understandable. So you could say ahata with a long A, but to make it understandable, they make it anatta. So it's atta becomes anatta. So it's a different root, different meaning. Anatta means not a self. Anatomy means to cut it up. Wade Cleveland, there is no soul, but there is a mind-mind body, and you can use that to bless the physical body. So my understanding about mind-made body is that all of the things in the world, including one's personal body, as well as external things, that the way experience happens is that the mind fabricates an image which we guess is corresponding to the actual thing that's happening to us, and then we don't experience the thing that's happening to us, we experience the image in the mind. In deep meditation, you can definitely sometimes experience that the mental image of the body is one thing, and the actual body is something else. And that the two things are that it's two separate things, that the actual body and the mind-made body are actually two separate things. And it's kind of a fascinating, blissful experience that can happen in meditation. And sometimes when people have what they call out-of-body experiences, it's also something that's related to the mind-made body. So that while you're on the table being operated on in surgery, your mind can leave and go to the top of the ceiling and look down on the room and see your body from above, different things like that. But those experiences are describing things that can happen in the sutras, describing things that can happen in meditation, but it's not that central to the Buddha's epistemology or the Buddha's explanation of how we know things. The definition of consciousness is clarity or unobstructedness and functions to cognize. There's many different words for clarity. I believe that it's actually, this is the traditional way that the commentators on Path of Purification describes it, is that it's when the consciousness is not obstructed by the hindrances, then one is able to see with clarity. So then, in that sense, actually in the Pali, that passage is referring to citta, which is very close in meaning to consciousness, that there's a pure citta, that the citta by itself is inherently pure, but that it's covered by adventitious defilements. So the defilements or the hindrances are like the clouds that come and cover the mind so that you're not able to see clearly. And then when the clouds separate, and then the mind or the citta is back to its pure state, it's like the sky behind it. I actually think that that description is a little different meaning than consciousness, because the same passage refers to where consciousness ceases. And when they speak about the cessation of consciousness, they are, and that passage is referring to the state of Nirodha Sampatti, which is a deep meditation accessible only to enlightened persons who are either fully enlightened arahants or non-returners, where the vijnana, which is experiencing that separation of the subject and the object, has disappeared or collapsed. And so that the ordinary way that we cognize is not happening in that state of meditation. Consciousness, meaning the ordinary consciousness, has temporarily ceased during that meditation. There's some other kind of knowing that's happening, but it's not described by vijnana. So vijnana, actually, cognition is a very good word for it. So it's the jnana is the knowing, and the ko is like with. So it's two things, like the mind and its object is coming together, and there's a cognizing. But a sense of clarity is very useful, beneficial, wholesome to develop, and it's a mark of being on the right track, of being skillful in practice to experience that clarity. Since we're studying the Satipatthana, the previous section that we were on about the mindful contemplation of the mind, the Citta Nupassana, having a clarity to be aware and sensitive and able to know what's happening with the mind itself, that then you could tell whether your mind is clear or whether your mind is distorted. And it's really useful to be able to see and recognize those differences, not to be mistaken or confused about it. Ryan asks, Dear Aya, if we are in accord with dependent origination and samsara by logic, we must agree we will take future rebirths, correct? If correct by the same logic. That would make us responsible for our future rebirth self into the best condition possible through merit practice and from a compassionate perspective. So if we're in accord with dependent origination, we also understand both the arising, which is leading to rebirth, and the cessation. So with the cessation of ignorance, the final cessation of ignorance, the whole house of cards of dependent arising conditioned by ignorance collapses, and then at that point we are not headed for rebirth. But as long as ignorance is still a factor, then we would be on the way to rebirth, and in that case it's to our benefit to do skillful, wholesome, and kind things, and not to do any harm to ourselves or to another, and to be absolutely draw back from doing anything that would be harmful to ourselves or another. It's also true that we can intentionally do actions leading to wisdom, which are moving us in the direction of the final collapse of ignorance, and moving us in the direction of not being caught on the round of samsara. Experientially, it still hurts. For instance, I have a gout flare. It hurts, and there is suffering. And with the form, but someone else has gout, it doesn't hurt the same. Yes. So you're much more likely to have emotional reaction, anxiety and fear, even mental illness in reaction to your own painful illness. And if you know that many people in Africa have the same condition, you might not feel the disturbance from that because of not picking up those reactions. That's just kind of common sense, isn't it? But to make us, you should make a distinction between a painful feeling and the dukkha. So the painful feeling is the first arrow. Even the Buddha had painful feeling from the aging of his body. But if you don't start to make a self out of that painful feeling, or feel that your self is threatened because of that painful feeling, then you would not start weeping and wailing and being upset and agitated because of that painful feeling. Instead, you would be able to either bear it patiently, or it's even conceivable that a person who's done a lot of meditation can bring compassion towards that painful feeling, can bring wise reflections towards that painful feeling, can use that painful feeling as a source of wisdom, and can, if you're capable, some people, if they're able to gain samadhi, they may be able to withdraw their attention away from the painful feeling of the disease, and instead place the attention on some uplifting and inspiring topic. And then that way the direct experience of pain will be less because the mind is focused elsewhere. And then one may be able to gain samadhi and withdraw the attention away from the five senses and just be directing awareness towards the mind. And in that case, the pain, the bodily pain, would not be creating a disturbance. It's for this reason that the Arahants of the olden days described samadhi as a place for the pleasant abiding, in part. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. Yes, I agree. Ryan, from my understanding about the self with independent origination, is that it is a mind-made phenomenon. However, could I expound on how to break the cycle of samsara at the feeling and craving link, please? Well, it is very interesting that there's an article by Ajahn Brahmali that disputes the common teaching that the link between feeling and craving is where you break the cycle of samsara. Ajahn Brahmali, it reminds us that where the link is broken is at ignorance. So ignorance is where it's cut. At the same time, by as is described in this sutta, when ignorance is present, then the ignorance plus feeling equals craving. That's what this sutta just told us. So when you get ignorance and feeling together, then invariably it leads to craving. So then when feeling arises, if you would remove the ignorance, that would be one way to take care of it. Another way of reducing, allaying, or calming the amount of reactivity to feeling is if you say that you will not delight, you don't welcome and delight in those feelings. So it's like when you're saying you're not going to take the bait. So if a feeling comes and you want to get involved in that feeling, you want to delight in that feeling, you want to keep that feeling, or even if it's an unpleasant feeling, you can't stop yourself from, you keep chewing on that unpleasant feeling because somehow you're attracted to, your attention is attracted to that unpleasant feeling. So you want to not delight it, not welcome it, and not remain clinging and cogitating about it. And that technique, in addition to not me, not mine, not myself, would be if you remember the insight in the feeling is only the feeling. So if you ponder that the feeling is just the feeling, and then the subsequent stages of thinking about it, and the proliferation of perceptions leading to unwholesome intentions and selfing, that whole like chain of causation from the feeling is not happening. If you're able to see just the feeling is just the feeling, let the feeling be there. It's there. You experience it for a while, and then it stops. The slogan that I use to make myself remember that it's just a feeling is I say, "Oh, this is pleasant. Oh, this is unpleasant. Oh, this is neutral." And that's my reminder that it's just a feeling, and I don't have to take the bait. Oh, okay. I'm not sure. if both forms, that's the mind-made form and the actual underlying material form, if both forms are not self, there's a clear distinction between forms how does the Buddha reconcile that? Because even though both forms are not self, one feels like it's self undeniably. For instance, if the Buddha has back pain, he felt it at the end of his life. Not sure he felt it if Ananda had back pain. Yes, I do think that previous question did get cut off. So the Buddha does explain conventional self, which is used for convenience in communicating. So self and conventional self is one way to work with it, and to know that conventional self is not necessarily a danger. Even the conventional self can be useful when the Buddha teaches about ethics. He uses terminology of the conventional self. So there's the one sutta where it says, other people kill, but I do not kill. Other people steal, but I do not steal. So in that sense, expressing the agency or the ability to make wholesome decisions, to undertake precepts is skillful, positive, and wholesome, and it's got only a slight little bit of danger that if you came to be conceited or proud because of it, then you would fall in the danger zone. But as long as you remember not to cling to a self, not to be conceited, but that you still have those abilities, and you still have the ability to take care of yourself in the ordinary way. And the Buddha recommends taking care of the sustaining the body, for the health of sustaining the health of the body, for the purpose of enabling this spiritual practice. Okay, so I think that's all the questions. Thank you very much for your participation this time. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.